Hey, how you doing? Brian Cain, host of the Mental Performance Mastery podcast, brought to you by Fundraising University. And today I am fired up to be joined by NASCAR driver Anthony Alfredo to discuss the mental aspects of driving, how Anthony trains his mental game, and also how he uses Pison, the world's first cognitive performance tracker, to improve his performance. Anthony, man, fired up for you to be joining us here on the podcast. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, this is awesome. I'm a big fan of the show, and I appreciate the opportunity to come on.
Yeah, man. I mean, I know there's so much I want to dive into, like in NASCAR, and I think for a lot of our listeners, maybe a lot of them coming from stick and ball sport community, and kind of getting an opportunity to hear you talk about the mental performance aspects of NASCAR. If I were to ask you, like, what is mental performance to you? What would you say?
For me, honestly, mental performance is just a lot of preparation because when you
Mm,
get in the car, especially racing at speeds of upwards and over 200 miles per hour, you don't have time to think about what you're going to do. It's all just subconscious competence, right? So you need to just make these decisions. Sometimes they're right, sometimes they're wrong, but being able to train yourself to make those split-second decisions and ultimately train to make the right one, which comes down to studying and film and looking at data and understanding just how to position yourself better in the various circumstances you find yourself in is the biggest thing. So there's just a huge part of racing that is just mental. Honestly,
mm,
it's so competitive, especially in the national series. Unlike most sports where there's just two teams and one of the two is going to win, there's 40 of us out there racing for the same thing, and second's the first loser. So
mm.
at this level of competition, you could execute a near flawless day behind the wheel on pit road with your team strategy and still not win. So anything you could do as a driver to be better prepared mentally and beat somebody before you even get into the car
Mm.
is a big advantage.
What are some of those things that you do, Anthony, like to train mentally to give you that edge?
So for me, a large part of it, honestly, is starts with simulation. We don't get a lot of track time anymore, which makes it really hard to know the handling of your car or make the balance kind of what you want out of it while at the track. We only get 20 minutes of practice, and then qualifying's one lap, and then we race. So
Mm.
that's new since the pandemic. You used to get hours of practice and tons of track time, but we actually had none during the pandemic, and that's when I came into the national series. So I was a rookie in the NASCAR Xfinity Series and the NASCAR Cup Series with zero practice, zero qualifying. I'd never driven either of those cars, and my first lap on most of the racetracks was the start of the race, the green
Mm.
flag. So I'm
Wow.
the first person in motorsports history to ever do that, and that's when I really realized how important mental, the mental side of things were. Just how important that is, cognitive training, because that was something that really was tough to have confidence going into, right? You were at a huge disadvantage. I was racing Ryan Newman, who was a rookie in the Cup Series when I was 1 years old. So I'm 20 years later, I'm a rookie racing against him. And how do you beat that, right?
Mm.
So just being able to be up with the times on the technology available, like Pison now, to be able to train, better prepare yourself, and then execute on race day is really important. So turning laps in the simulator, even though it's virtual, it just gives you the right visual cues, gives you confidence and what you need to do behind the wheel at the track. And then in the gym, training and using my device to just improve reaction time, learn how to get dialed in and focus. Before I get into the car, just how do you get into the mode, right?
Yeah.
On race day, we don't have any on track time other than the race. So you might practice and qualify the day before, but on race day, you're just getting in that thing cold turkey and
Mm.
starting the race. So
Mm.
being able to get dialed in before that green flag and not waste any laps, just getting your bearing straight is critical.
Are you hitting the simulator on race day, like before you get in there to kind of get warmed up, or is it more like a physical warm up, or both? What's that look like if we were following you?
So the simulator, unfortunately, just isn't that accessible. So at least with Chevrolet, they have the GM Tech Center in the Charlotte, North Carolina area, and so do the other manufacturers in NASCAR. They have large engineering staffs that are at these facilities with multiple simulators for those teams and drivers to utilize, and they all pretty much get an allotment of time there. I'm very spoiled because I drive the simulator actually full time for Hendrick Motorsports, which is pretty much the most successful or decorated Cup Series team in history. And doing that for them is a lot of R&D stuff, but also setup tuning for their Cup Series program. And that's in addition to my own racing team that I drive for on the weekends. So I'm in the simulator every day for hours on end doing a lot of different things. So I'm certainly spoiled with that compared to other guys that only get, a shift, like a couple hours or something, a week or not even. Some people it's less than that, a couple times a month. So I do a lot of that during the week, but on race weekend, there is no simulation. It's just going to come down to looking at data and driver telemetries and studying film.
Hmm. What about like mental imagery and visualization? Is that something that you do in NASCAR to prepare where like maybe the day of or the night before, you've been to the track, you know what it's going to be like. Obviously, you know what the inside of the car is like, you know what it's like when you're out there. So you're kind of closing your eyes and like whether it's visualizing the start of the race, like a UFC fighter is often going to visualize the start of the fight. And then it just kind of happens and they're out there because they're in it. Like, is that something that you have done at all in terms of preparation?
A ton. I do it honestly probably every day, but a
Mm.
lot on race weekend, laying in we travel, February through November. It's one of the longest seasons in sports, or at least a points, competitive championship season, right? So the off season is short. It's a month and a half, and you really spend it kind of wrapping up that following season and preparing for the next one. So during the season, you're doing a lot of those mental reps on race weekend. You're in your hotel bed, lights are off, in the dark. I usually just close my eyes and imagine all my shift points, just the sound of the motor and the pitch it's going to be at in the corners, where I'm going to position myself. And then I like to imagine different situations I might find myself in. I mean, it's practically impossible it is impossible to plan exactly how a race is going to go,
Yeah.
but you can plan for things you would do in certain situations. So even when I'm watching film, I don't just watch myself back from a previous race. I'm watching the whole race, the strategy, what other guys were doing. Maybe there's someone faster running a different line. And I just try to put myself in the car and imagine what it would feel like if I were doing that and what kind of adjustments I would need from my crew chief and the team in order to give me the balance in my race car to accomplish that, because
Mm.
handling is everything. You can only go as fast as the car will let you. So you're going to have to make mechanical or aerodynamic adjustments for that. So that's a big thing, is just pretending like you're in the seat and just imagining the sensations you're having and what you would do on a late race restart, make it a move for the win, or maybe you are the leader. How do you defend that and keep everyone behind you? Just so much goes into it.
Mm. Man, so it's awesome because as for the people in our community listening to this here that are into mental performance, like NASCAR, I've been to two races in my life. I went to Loudon, New Hampshire. I've been to one out here in Arizona, and one time I've been in a car. No, I wasn't even a NASCAR. It was on a dirt track, and I made it 2 laps, and I was like, I gotta get out of this thing as a passenger because it's like my stomach. I feel like I'm on a roller coaster right now. I gotta get out. So like the amount of respect that I have for what you guys are doing, going 200 miles an hour, like how close are you to other cars when you're out there? I mean, you're rubbing or you're inches out, right? It's not like it's feet, it's inches.
Yeah, it's inches, and we touch a lot of the time. We're fortunate because we race full bodied cars, unlike an Indy car, an open wheel car in F1, where, they can't really touch because just tire on tire contact's bad. Where with the fenders, we could lean on each other a lot more. We say rubbing is racing.
Yeah,
At the
yeah.
faster tracks, you don't want to touch a whole lot because just the slightest bit of damage can drastically impact aerodynamic, performance. But we race at such a variety of tracks where the way you execute, the way you drive the car, and the things you need out of your car, what you need to do as a driver is always different. And super speedway racing, for one examples, that's where we're over 200 miles per hour the whole time. It's Talladega, Daytona. We're pushing really hard. We're in big groups. They call it the big one, which is usually a wreck where a lot of cars are involved
Mm,
because we're all so close together. You just don't have time to slow down or avoid it, and everyone just piles in, and that's where that reaction time and all that certainly comes into play. But
yeah.
at those speeds, you're on the edge of control, so much so that the best way I could describe it is, especially for someone who's never been to a race, like TV doesn't do it justice. When you go there, the sound, the smell, the sensation of speed is totally different. But what you still struggle to comprehend is that we're so far on the edge of control and on the limit of the car and the tire, the grip, right, of the track surface, that we don't even have to touch each other to cause an accident. So we're so so much so on the ragged edge of control that just getting too close to another car can literally cause them to spin out and
Mm.
cause an accident or a crash. So there's a lot of give and take there, because it's not just like, oh, you ran into somebody and spun them out. Well, you don't have to touch someone. We're just that sensitive to aerodynamics from other cars around you. So that's just a whole nother level, you know, of racing that I love, that I find fascinating.
Like, talk to me about the element of fear, right? Like if you've gotten in accidents or you're there and you see that, right? And maybe it's just something that you become numb to over the course of your lifetime of driving at that speed. It's just normal, right? It's like when I had George St. Pierre, a UFC fighter, come out to the University of Southern California and he jumps into the batting cage after 3 pitches. He's like, man, I'm getting out of here. I'm like, dude, the thing's coming at you at 60 miles an hour. He goes, I'm getting out of here, right? Because he's not used to that, but he can take a punch to the face and all that. And it's normal for him, right? So I think you can become a little bit desensitized to that fear, but like the UFC fighters I work with, they still have fear getting in there, even though they've been doing it for a long time. Like, how does fear work for you in the car? Does it exist? Do you use it to sharpen senses? Like, what's the fear like when you're out there?
So for me, it doesn't exist once I put the helmet on. It's just kind of that supernatural, like, alter ego. You put the helmet on and you
Mm.
just shut out a lot of things. There's certain things in your life that you can't be thinking of behind the wheel, because you're not going to perform at your peak. You're not going to push the limit and drive on that ragged edge of control I mentioned,
Yeah.
because being right on that limit is, the um the closest you are to crashing without stepping over that limit is like peak speed, right? You're at the absolute limit of the car going as fast as you can go. So any little bit under that, you're losing. And in
Yeah.
this sport, we fight for tenths of a second, which is
Mm.
literally what it takes you to blink your eyes. So, for example, we're at Sonoma Raceway this past weekend, which is a road course. So you would think with 12 turns, you might be fighting for a second or something to gain advantage on someone. Well, really, I was 1/10 of a second from qualifying eighth place, and I was 16th place in qualifying. And then when you go to the ovals, it's hundredths of a second or thousandths of a second. That's how tight it is. So it's really important that you are operating at, your peak mental, capability, and your physical, obviously, ability. But I would say, fear is detrimental to that. So I think if you're scared before you get in the car, you probably just shouldn't be racing. I don't think
Yeah.
those people make it very far. And
Yeah.
honestly, we see drivers who race for a long time, but then they reach a point in their life where, you know, they have families, they have kids, or they're just they've taken enough hits in their career and they don't want to put themselves through that anymore. So that's when we see them retire. And for a younger guy like me, it just kind of comes with the territory. I know you have the risk of having a mechanical failure or blowing a tire. And at those speeds, you're most likely going to hit something and it's not going to feel good, but
Mm.
you have to be able to brush it aside and get back in the car the next week. So, in fact, one of my worst crashes, I followed up the next week with my career best finish, on the
Mm.
podium. So,
Wow.
that was cool to prove to myself, honestly, because I had that wreck and, it all happened. It was kind of like, okay, that whatever, I didn't feel good. And then I saw the replay and I was like, wow, it could have been really bad. My family's freaking out and all that. They weren't there because of the pandemic. No one was allowed to be there. So it was like worst case scenario. And that, their fear for me is probably what made me feel a little bit nervous. Like, okay, this is pretty serious. I'm doing this because I love it, but I would hate to, have an effect on anyone else. Right. And then the next week I went out there and had an excellent race, great finish. And I proved to myself that, number one, it didn't affect me, but two, it's just not in the cards.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just something you have to accept that, like, I'm not going to allow that to creep in. I love what you said about when you put the helmet on, you become void of normal human emotion, normal human feelings, and things that are going on. And that helmet is almost like you flipping the switch into the alter ego. And for, our listeners, there's a great book that I recommend a lot to athletes called The Alter Ego Effect by a guy named Todd Herman. And he goes in to talk about that exact thing of like, how do you separate who and do? How do you have a physical trigger that when you put a logo on when you're doing a podcast, or you put a helmet on, or you get your hands wrapped as a fighter, like, you become a different person, and thinking about what the identity of that person is and allowing you to step into that on a more consistent basis so that you can show up who you need to be the best driver you can be, but then also what's your identity as a husband, what's your identity as a future father, of how you want to show up there too. I think that identity creation is something that becomes critical.
100%. And I think a big part of it too is just our sport. Like there's been a ton of safety advances and new technology that protects the driver. And honestly, when you're a younger driver, and Tony Stewart said it best, he said, a lot of these young drivers coming up the ranks think they could take a hit and they really haven't hit hard enough yet. And he said, it's not until you hit hard enough that you'll see a driver's true potential, because if they can get back in that car and back it up with a good performance, they're the real deal. And ironically, that was like 2 weeks before my experience of that. But it was also just knowing you get in a wreck. And like I said, it wasn't until I got out and saw the replay that I was like, holy cow, that was a lot crazier than
Yeah.
I thought it was, or at least from my perspective. And then it makes you appreciate, okay, it's pretty safe. All my safety equipment did its job. The NASCAR safety officials are on the scene super quick. And it makes you feel more comfortable getting back into the car. Now, maybe like other sports or industries, it's a little different, but for us, I get into the race car and I feel safe in it. I
Yeah.
know things can happen. But I'm confident in the equipment my team builds me, and the advancements made by NASCAR and their engineers.
And things can happen in everyday life, right? I mean, it's like
Yep.
you can, yeah, you can. I had a UFC fighter I was working with. He was getting ready to make his debut, and he's on a mat in the locker room, and he's doing a tuck jump, just standing, bringing his knees up to his chest, like getting ready to go. And he catches his ankle on the side of a mat, breaks his ankle, can't fight. Like he's getting ready to make his debut, and he breaks his ankle doing a move that he does 100 times a day for his entire life. It's so freak things happen, and I think sometimes we got to like know that and respect that. And part of how we work through that is the preparation, and we say a lot like separation is in preparation. I want to kind of dive in, Anthony, to some of the mental preparation that you're doing. And you mentioned using Pison and kind of the cognitive readiness and the agility and the focus that you get when you're working with Pison. I noticed that you were wearing it too. Like, talk to us about what Pison is for you, how you use it, the difference it's made, etc. Like, how has that impacted you?
So it's been huge for me. I've always been really intrigued by, any sort of physical data I could gather about myself on a race weekend, just vitals and whatnot, before the race, during the race, and after, and then through training to just better prepare myself for the next event. And I'm just a little bit of a health nut on that side of things. So even if I wasn't a professional athlete, I'd still be into going to the gym and living a healthy lifestyle. But certainly it's really important as a professional athlete. So to have something that gives me, you know, actual data on my cognitive function and ability is really awesome. And not just that, but be able to train and make it better, become faster, get myself dialed in on race day, like we were talking about, and just focusing on that mental agility. So it provides a lot of data for me, not just reaction time, but that agility, that focus. And I could even kind of use the device in some unique ways that I've been talking to the Pison team about, rather than just some of the straightforward testing. They use a light to indicate when you need to react to it. And it's measuring basically your pre-motor time, and you're using your neurophysiology. So it's really advanced technology, but sometimes instead of just looking directly at the light, I'll hold my arm to the side a little bit or pick a point maybe on my desk to look at, and I try to pick it up with my peripheral vision.
Yep, yep,
Because
yep.
in the race car, our visuals are super limited. You can't see a lot with the head surround. You can't really turn your head at all. And we have spotters that tell us a lot of what's going on. But when you're racing side by side, you're almost picking up the sound of the other car or just seeing it in the corner of your eye without actually looking at it. Because obviously, you need to look at you always look where you want to go, not where you don't want to go. That's
Yeah,
one of the
yeah.
first things I learned when I started racing. So to just use it as a way to kind of enhance those senses has been pretty valuable.
Is there things that you do like you'll use it on a daily basis to kind of get a baseline before you get in the car, and then based off of what you get on that baseline score, you may do certain things, whether it's a cold plunge, whether it's cryo, whether it's a meditation or exercises. Like, what would it look like if we were following you at a race or in preparation for a race and seeing how you use that device to help you get locked in and how you train?
Love it. Great question. So I wake up and I test my reaction time. I have a baseline. So I'm always referencing that. My baseline is pretty quick. So some days, I might not fire off there, but maybe I have a cup of coffee. It's interesting to see how caffeine affects my reaction
Yeah.
time. Or like you said, you take a cold plunge or even a workout, maybe your adrenaline's a little bit up. That increases the time. And on a race day, it's, when I wake up before I get into the car, and then I like to test after I get into the car, because if I get out and immediately test, it's actually can sometimes be faster than when I got in, just
Yeah.
because that adrenaline gets going. Sometimes, after maybe an hour, you start to kind of crash, everything wears down, and you're back to normal, or maybe a little slower because you left it all on the table and you're wore out, right?
Yeah.
But during the week, same thing throughout the day, the evening, which has really helped me see when I am actually my fastest. And just by coincidence, when I started using the device now for a few months, I'm actually fastest at about 3 in the afternoon, which surprised me. I thought I'd have been faster like a couple hours into the day in the morning. But it works out because that's almost when the majority of our races are, is about 3 in the afternoon. We have a couple night races, a couple earlier starts, but that tells me I'm fastest at race time, which I'm
Yeah.
very happy about. But a cool part that I've done is in my training, like I'll be, just say I'm cycling 50 miles or 30 miles, just call it 30 miles. At mile 10, I might test, and at mile 20, I might test, and then at mile 30, when I'm done, I'll test. So I could actually see
Hmm.
if it varies, and maybe it kind of deteriorates because I'm getting tired, or maybe it picks back up, because that's what ultimately happens in the car. Is you're in a really kind of miserable environment. Honestly, it's a little uncomfortable. It's hot. You're in the car for a long time. You can't move a whole lot, and you're making these split-second decisions. So if you start to deteriorate physically, you're certainly going to deteriorate mentally. But even if you're in great physical shape, if you're not mentally, you're gonna make mistakes. So being able to incorporate into my routine to try to emulate being in the race car has been actually super cool.
I wanted to dive into that, right? Because I think like the more you unpack what it's like to be in there, how much weight have you lost just from dehydration of sweat during races? Like when you're racing at Talladega or other places where it can be hot, right? And you're in the car and it's hot. Like, what's that like for you just from a dehydration standpoint?
I love answering this question because it certainly varies track to track. Just um, some are more mentally demanding than others. Some are more physically demanding, and then you have ones that are both. And we were racing at Road America in Wisconsin during a heat wave. It was like the hottest summer they had in 100 years or something crazy. It was over 100 outside. And I weighed myself before and after the race. I lost 12 pounds just in sweat loss. So that tells you how important nutrition and hydration is, not just the week leading up to an event, but throughout the race, right? And
Mhm.
rehydrating after. But lost 12 pounds. It was upwards of 140 degrees inside the car. And I was in there for 3.5 hours. So it's really hot in the summer. That's when we see those temperatures. If it's an 80-degree day, you'll still see maybe 110 inside the car, and you're wearing this 3-layer fire suit. There's no AC in NASCAR. And then obviously we are in a closed cockpit, so you don't have like IndyCar or Formula One where they just have
Yeah.
airflow directly on them. We're one of the only closed cockpit series that doesn't have air conditioning. So you have driver cooling, which is basically just a hose coming off a NACA duct in the rear window, and it'll only cool the outside air temp like 20 degrees. So if it's 100 degrees, you have 80-degree air blowing on your head. If you get in your car on a summer day and go crank the air on 80, it doesn't feel too good. It just makes it a little bit less miserable and having no airflow at all, and just
Yeah.
helps you breathe a little bit.
Wow. So you're in there, you lose 12 pounds, you're in a car, it's 140 degrees. Like think about going to sit in a sauna at 140 for 4 hours. And now imagine doing that, driving 200 miles an hour, rubbing and being an inch away from a car. Like, holy shit.
Overwhelming. Yeah.
Yes. And like the preparation that has to go into that physically and mentally, like what does your training routine look like, whether it be weight room? Like I know you mentioned cycling, or is it mostly cardio based? Like, is it endurance based? Because you're kind of in an endurance sport. It's a 4 hour, it's about the length of a triathlon, a half Ironman, like a marathon. Um, what does that training look like for you?
It's honestly a lot of cross training. So, I explain the environment, right? So everyone thinks just because we sit for a living, how demanding could it be? Or they think it's like driving their car to the grocery store just really fast. But you have G forces on your body. It's really hot. You have just all these factors, right? And that's the ambient temperature I was referencing in the car. The actual parts of the car get really hot. Like we get blisters on our feet sometimes just from the pedals getting that hot because they're so close to the motor behind the firewall. It could be like 300 degrees on the floor of the car. So it's not always the most comfortable environment. And the biggest thing is in training is to cross train. So you need really good cardio because your heart rate is elevated that whole time from the intensity of it. For me, my average heart rate in the car is usually 130, 140 beats per minute, and that's for 4 hours on end, which I practically can't replicate any other way because most activities are too high impact, right? Like
Yeah.
I could go on a run and maintain 130 beats per minute, but I'm not running 4 hours. Or I could ride my bike for 4 hours maybe if I had to, but that's why I got into cycling was because it's lower impact than running or anything like that. I know some guys are big into swimming, same thing. It's lower impact, but you could keep your heart rate elevated for a longer period of time because it's not as high impact. So I could really replicate on my bike just with my cadence and when I'm riding. Oh, I'm only 120 beats per minute. I'm going to pedal a little faster because in the car it's a little more than that. Or if it's a little too high, get it back down because that's what you're doing in the car is you're trying to pace yourself and manage that heart rate. And my max is usually my mathematical max heart rate. I might see 180, 190 beats per minute in the
In the car.
car, and it's not rare. I mean, that's pretty much a weekly occurrence. You usually have a moment in the race where you're at your mathematical max, as I call it. Obviously, some people train and they're able to go over that, but that's normal to see as a peak. And then, like I said, that average is the 140 range. So, plenty of cardio, strength training. The steering wheel is not necessarily easy to turn, especially when you go into a corner and the G force is loaded up. It gets heavier. The forces on your body. Even just pushing the brake pedal is harder than people realize. The brakes we run, and depending on like what master cylinders and the kind of science you have behind it, the pedal is really firm. And when we go to a road course in a heavy stock car, 3,400-pound car, you might be going 150 miles an hour into a corner, and it doesn't stop very well. So you're standing on this brake pedal as hard as you physically can. And one track, it's a great example, is Martinsville Speedway in Virginia. It's a short track, very, very sharp corners with long straightaways. They call it the paperclip. You're standing on the brake pedal, threshold braking as hard as you could push it every single lap. We run 500 laps there in the Cup Series. So that's 1,000 times. I like to tell people you're basically doing 1,000 leg presses with your left leg, and our brake pressure there is close to 1,000 pounds. So obviously, with master cylinder ratios, it's not literally leg pressing 1,000 pounds, but it's as hard as you physically can. So it wears you out a lot. And then just with the horsepower we have, it's a lot of throttle control. And the way I explain that to people is imagine there's an egg between your foot and the gas pedal and you don't want to break it. That's how gentle you have to be to not spin the tires because of all the horsepower. So those factors are just what make you really tense in the car. And then you put all these other cars around you and it is tough, man. So training, strength training and cardio training, and mental training is as critical as any other sport.
Yeah. I mean, it's unbelievable, man. This has been really fun for me. Not, having worked in a lot of sports. Before we got on, I've talked about like being in the corner of a UFC fight and at a figure skating world championship in the same week. And it's like, there's similarities and a lot of differences in those sports, but dude, what you're describing is like nothing I've ever heard, man. This is wild. The impact that sleep plays, right? I know Pison is working on a technology to be able to give you a lot of sleep data, like an Aura or a Whoop with heart rate variability and what time you went to sleep and did you get restorative sleep? Like, I know you're big into data, Anthony. How important is sleep and sleep tracking for you?
It's huge. And honestly, as I'm sure a lot of other people deal with, even if you just travel a lot for work, you think about how much it affects you during the day, right? Like maybe you're traveling for work and you have a presentation and you're on a red eye flight somewhere, or you get there late and you got to get up early. I mean, we deal with that a lot, flying out the day before a race or the morning of practice, and you're up maybe you didn't sleep as much as you want to, or you just didn't have the quality of sleep you had hoped. It definitely plays a factor getting in the car. So just doing all you can to get into a routine and try to be well rested is very important. I think it's why we see so many drivers with motorhomes is it's your home away from home, right? If you could have the same mattress you have at home, you're that and pillow and all that, you're that much more comfortable and you could just kind of replicate that environment because you're used to it. Whereas sleeping in a hotel every weekend, isn't ideal or doesn't help you get the optimal sleep.
Mm. It's funny you mentioned that about the motorhome. JJ Watt, when he was playing for the Houston Texans, had the same bed he had at his house in their like equipment room at the complex, so he wouldn't have to fight Houston traffic going home. He could just go in and take a nap in the same bed that he had at his house, same sheets, everything, to maximize his time and save all that drive time, which can be unpredictable in a city like that. So I thought that's fascinating, right? And some of the similarities I think when it comes to like elite preparation and performance is elite preparation and performance. And even though the sport, whether it's UFC, baseball, NASCAR, there's different similarities in terms of the training that you do. I feel like if you're elite and you understand routine and structure and the dedication and the discipline and the decision making that all of that takes. How important is just like your just daily routine and what you do even between races when you're back home in Charlotte? Like how important is that daily routine for you to stay elite and keep that edge?
It's super important, and for me, my weeks are pretty consistent. I'm usually home Monday through Thursday. Flying if it's a West Coast race, we fly out Thursday, but usually we fly out now that we've gone to that less practice, less track time. You're usually flying out Friday morning, like this weekend we will for Iowa Speedway. Fly out Friday morning, you practice, qualify, and the next day you race and then you come back immediately post race. So usually Saturday night, or if you're racing Sunday in the Cup Series, Sunday night. But then it's straight back to it Monday. Like you don't get a day off Monday. You're debriefing with the team, going over the previous race, and then prepping for the following week. And it's hard on the crew members too, the guys building and preparing these cars, and then you as an athlete doing your part to execute for them behind the wheel. So
Mm.
having Monday through Thursday to be as consistent as possible and just get everything done that I need to get done. Whether it's just daily life things or training things prior to a race is definitely critical. But you have a lot of obligations as a professional athlete. In our sport, we have a lot of sponsors, and I wouldn't be able to race without any of my partners. So going to appearances and media opportunities and taking advantage of all that is valuable, but it certainly adds it shakes up your schedule, right?
Yeah.
I'm a big planner. I would do the same thing every day if I could. But sometimes you have things come up and you've got to work your way around them. So just being organized and managing your time is definitely just crucial.
Yeah, I was looking at your Instagram earlier. I love some of the posts that you made about dude wipes and making sure that there's no skid marks on the track. I thought that was really good.
Yeah, yeah. Dude Wipes has been with me for 5 years now. They're pretty much my flagship sponsor, and we've brought on a lot more over the years, and are developing some new relationships, which is awesome. NASCAR in football and basketball, these other sports, they don't need a sponsor. Like if the team show up, there's going to be a game if they have a place to play. But in racing and pretty much all motorsports, we can't go compete without the sponsors, right? So we do everything to give them their return on investment and value and just make it a mutually beneficial partnership. And I've had a lot of fun growing over the years with Dude Wipes. I mean, they're a huge company now and actually like really well known since they first came on the scene in the wipe industry.
No, it's awesome. You're actually the second athlete I've had on the podcast that has a relationship with dude wipes, which is pretty cool.
Who's the first one?
Kike Hernandez. So with
Oh,
that
there you
Los
go.
Angeles
Yep.
Dodgers, he's a big dude
That's
wipes guy.
awesome.
Yeah, it's
Hmm.
hilarious, man. I love it. So it happens if you crap your pants during a baseball game, you get hit up by dude wipes.
Yep.
Beautiful. Um, Last question for you, Anthony. You know, watching again some of the stuff on Instagram, which I think for anybody who's looking at this to go check you out on Instagram, we'll put a link to it in our show notes. One of some of the videos of like you listening to your team talk to you while you're driving, right? How important is that crew chief, athlete, coach, athlete, team athlete relationship when it comes to NASCAR? Because I think for people that don't follow the sport or know it that well, they would think it's just about the driver making left turns for 4.5 hours, but it's so much more than that. Like how important is that culture and the relationship that y'all have as a team and an athlete?
It's everything. Chemistry is number one. If you and your guys aren't clicking, you're not going to be very successful. And it's just like other sports. There's no I in team. And in our sport, there might be one guy behind the wheel, but I'm not getting to the track without my team. They're building me fast cars. When we get to the track, they're executing with adjustments throughout the race. The crew chief is making the decisions on what adjustments they need to make. My job as a driver isn't just to go fast, but to relay what I need to go fast. So if the car's not handling to my liking or I want an adjustment, I need to tell them what I'm fighting. And my crew chief ultimately makes a decision, with our engineer on what adjustment will best suit that. And then the pit crews changing 4 tires and fuel in 12 seconds with that adjustment, making these swings at the car throughout the race on pit road to just try to get faster, because if you're not getting better, someone else is, right? So it's just keeping up with those guys and trying to stay ahead is so important. And then my spotter is my eyes in the sky. I mentioned how limited visibility is. You can't see a lot inside the car. So they basically tell us when cars are around us, like in our blind spots, essentially, and just give you an idea of not just what's around you, but maybe what other guys are doing. The crew chief's on the pit box looking at data in live time with the race broadcast, and he could see, say you're running 8th place and you can't necessarily see the leader, but he sees on telemetry or in the race broadcast that the leader's running a different line than you. Him and my spotter can collect that data and relay that information to me, and then it's my job to try to implement that. So there's just so many factors on the communication side, but it certainly wouldn't be possible just without everybody's execution. We win and lose as a team. There's no one person. Everybody's got a role, and we all have our own hats to wear. So I enjoy that part of it because I've got a great group of people I'm working with, especially this year, and have worked with great people in the past that I've learned from.
Yeah. Anthony, last question for you. If you could go back and like remove the skull cap of yourself when you first became a professional athlete, and you could go back and say, here's what I know now, I wish I knew then. And you'd give your younger version of yourself some advice. What would you say?
That's a loaded question because there'd be a lot, but I would say the first thing is probably patience.
Mm,
I had a different path into this sport, just growing up a race fan, not having blood in the sport or knowing someone who raced. It's been a lot of networking, a lot of sacrifice from myself, my family, and friends. And the biggest thing is just patience. Nothing's supposed to come easy.
mm.
It wouldn't be fun if it was easy. You got to work hard for it, and just don't get impatient. Just grind it out, for better or worse. Even when things are going well, it's not always. And when it gets tough, you have to get right. You have a bad race, you got to go right back at it the next week with the same happy, excited, ambitious attitude that
Mm.
you had, before you had one. So you can't get down. You just got to be on your game at all times and not take it for granted. That's the biggest thing. I'm blessed to be doing what I'm doing. I only could have dreamed this when I was that age younger. So
Mm.
I would just say that when you get the opportunity, kid, run every lap like it's your last.
Mm. Love that. Love that. Anthony, best place for people to engage with you. Is it on X? Is it on Instagram for all the fans that you're picking up from doing this, man? And where's the best place for them to engage with you and find out what you're up to?
I'm on pretty much every social media platform, just my name, Anthony Alfredo. I probably post on Instagram the most, but try to be active on everything else: Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, Twitch. I mean, you name it, I'm there. So looking forward to connecting with some of you. And if you shoot me a message, I'd love to answer any questions you might have too.
It's awesome. Anthony Alfredo, thanks for joining us here on the Mental Performance Mastery podcast. Looking forward to catching you at the track, brother. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.